Monsieur le Président, merci.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to take this opportunity of also thanking you very warmly, thanking the Swiss government and all the authorities of the canton of Graubünden who are well represented here. And a special word of thanks goes to the municipality of Davos and its authorities for the tremendous hospitality, which means that our meeting here is as safe as possible and as successful and pleasant as possible. And so thank you very much once again.
Let me share with you rapidly what will happen the next 1.5 hours. We will first have two eminent personalities who will rapidly pinpoint two of the challenges which are of an epochal nature, and I think two of the challenges which really will determine the future of humankind. And I have the great pleasure to ask President Karzai to join us here, and also Dr. Pachauri. And I don't have to introduce those two personalities. President Karzai, President of Afghanistan since 2001, a very courageous man and probably someone with the toughest jobs in our world today. And Dr. Pachauri is chairing the Intergovernmental Panel, the UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And as you all know, his organization, together with former President Al Gore, has received the Nobel Prize for their efforts to make climate change an important issue on the global agenda. And I'm pleased to say that Mr. Al Gore will join us, as you all know, tomorrow morning. I'm pleased also to welcome Tony Blair among us, our new foundation board member, if I may say so, and our co-chair. Now, let's listen to those two personalities who are at the forefront in terms of two of the epochal challenges. After a very short intervention, 5 minutes, if I may say so, we afterwards will proceed with the opening speech of the Secretary of State, Condoleezza Rice, to be followed afterwards by a discussion into which we will involve all our co-chairs. So, President Karzai, may I ask you to take the floor.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Your Excellency, President Pascal Couchepin, my esteemed friend, Professor Klaus Schwab, Mr. Pachauri, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure to be in Davos again, Dr. Schwab, and thank you very much for inviting me. Ladies and gentlemen, a little over 6 years ago, on September 11, the world was shaken by an unprecedented event. Overnight, to millions around the world who had, until then, remained immune from the perils of terrorism, a new gruesome reality was brought home. International terrorism was not, however, born on 9/11, nor was it a surprise that terrorists had chosen the World Trade Center, because in the year 1999, a cousin of mine working for an Afghan demining agency met two young Taliban, that is, students of religious school. And when their work was over, one of the young Taliban, maybe he was 15 or 16, told my cousin that he wished he had a skirt full of bombs to throw at New York. This is 1999. And in 2001, we had the incident of September 11. So, September 11, 2001, we all woke up to a changed world, a world that could no longer remain undecided about this glaring threat. 6 years later, the world is still at war, and terrorism is far from being defeated. While Afghanistan is still a crucial battlefield, a rapidly spreading war is engulfing the wider region. Terrorist attacks have evolved in number, tactics, and brutality. New battlefronts are opened up each day. Our strategies in this war have often been shortchanged by a host of deceptive rhetoric or due to lingering misconceptions about the nature of the enemy. Over the past 3 months, ladies and gentlemen, the terrorists have blown up a mosque in Peshawar, Pakistan, on Eid prayers while people were praying for Eid, killing over 50 people. They have attacked in Baghlan, killing in Afghanistan, killing over 60 children and our parliamentarians. They have hanged an elderly lady in Helmand, Afghanistan, and they have decapitated another elderly lady in Waziristan, Pakistan, on the charges of spying for the US. And to cap it all, they have assassinated former Prime Minister of Pakistan, Benazir Bhutto, in a brutal attack in Rawalpindi. I am sure that events of the past few weeks in Pakistan have caused tremendous distress in many corners of the world. It seems like the mutant of extremism is dangerously unleashed across the region. By all indications, the wildfire spread of terrorism across our region bodes terribly badly for the whole world. Here are some questions that beg answers. Why is terrorism still a threat, as it was 6 years ago? Who sustains this threat? And why have we not succeeded to the extent that we should have in eliminating it? I believe today is an appropriate time, and this forum an appropriate place to reflect on our war against terrorism, which we must win. In that spirit, let's not lose sight of who the enemy actually is. The terrorism we are fighting is an existential force, not a conceptual challenge. It has nothing to do with religion, because if it had anything to do with religion, it would not go to kill people praying in a mosque on Eid day, and it would not go to kill people on another day, which is a day of sorrow, that is the day of the remembrance of Hazrat Hussein. Therefore, it has nothing to do with religion, nor with any idea of a cause. It is political and sponsored in essence. The extremism we see in our region does not emanate from a legitimate ideology, nor does it represent a social reaction to the so-called clash of civilization. The terrorism we are fighting is a political mutant, a Frankenstein created through the folly of short-sighted policy for the reckless pursuit of misperceived interests. It is a venomous snake that some among us try to nurture and befriend at the expense of others, which I hope we now realize was a mistake. The focus of our war against terrorism, ladies and gentlemen, must be the elimination of the sanctuaries where terrorists hide and recuperate. We must destroy the elaborate terrorist infrastructure in the region, their sources of motivation and finance, and their networks for recruitment. And to be able to do so, governments in the region need to move beyond rhetoric and stop to seek the pursuit of interests in the use of extremist politics. Complacency must no longer be tolerated. No individual or entity must be allowed to support extremism with impunity. Clearly, ladies and gentlemen, no effort to break the vicious cycles of terrorism and violence can succeed without a focused, determined, and sustained global partnership. Whereas a global endeavor to fight terrorism is vital, the war can only be won if local populations are empowered to confront it. This is the only way forward, and thank you very much.
Your Excellency, President Kushma, President Hamid Karzai, Professor Schwab, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, it's a unique privilege for me to speak before this August gathering at a time when the world needs to identify and address some formidable new challenges that face us. The year 2007 saw an unprecedented increase in awareness related to global warming and climate change. And this explosion of knowledge and awareness resulted from a number of factors, not the least of which is the release of the fourth assessment report of the IPCC. The Norwegian Nobel Committee highlighted the threat of climate change to global peace by awarding the 2007 Nobel Peace Prize to the panel and Mr. Al Gore. But today we also know on the basis of our reports that climate change, if unmitigated, can have serious implications for the economic well-being of human society. It would be convenient to submerge this reality under the financial problems that the world is facing this week, but we would indeed be doing so at the peril of ignoring the world's most pressing problems. Why has the latest report made such an impact on the minds of the public and of leaders drawn from different fields of endeavor and different regions of the world? The answer lies in the fact that knowledge and the science related to climate change have progressed substantially in the last 6 years since the third assessment report. Hence, our findings this time are stronger, the gaps in existing knowledge much narrower, and uncertainties substantially lower. Some of the major findings of this report are, and I quote, warming of the climate system is unequivocal, as is now evident from the observations of increases in average air and ocean temperatures, widespread melting of snow and ice, and rising average sea level. Also much stronger and sharper is the finding related to the human influence on climate change, as conveyed in the statement. Most of the observed increase in temperatures since the mid-20th century is very likely due to the increase in anthropogenic greenhouse gas concentrations, very likely represents a probability of over 90%. However, despite the global community having agreed to combating anthropogenic climate change through universal acceptance of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, as far back as in 1992, global greenhouse gas emissions continue to increase, with a substantial jump of 70% between 1970 and 2004. Within a long time perspective, the atmospheric concentrations of CO2, and that's carbon dioxide and methane, in 2005 exceeded by far the natural range over the last 650,000 years. The last time the polar regions were significantly warmer than present for an extended period, and that was about 125,000 years ago, reductions in polar ice volume led to 4 to 6 meters of sea level rise. Global efforts to address the problem unfortunately remain weak and inadequate. even as changes in climate become more serious. 11 of the last 12 years rank among the 12 warmest years in the instrumental record of global surface temperature since 1850. Global average sea level has risen during the 20th century by about 17 centimeters, while average surface temperature increased by about 0.74 degrees Celsius. Over the 20th century, precipitation increased significantly in eastern parts of North and South America, Northern Europe, and Northern and Central Asia, but declined in the Sahel, the Mediterranean, Southern Africa, and parts of Southern Asia. It's likely that heat waves have become more frequent over most land areas, and the frequency of heavy precipitation events has increased over most areas. There's observational evidence of an increase in intense tropical cyclone activity in the North Atlantic since about 1970. Anthropogenic warming could lead to some impacts that are abrupt or irreversible, depending upon the rate and magnitude of climate change. Partial loss of ice sheets on polar land and/or thermal expansion of seawater over very long time scales could imply meters of sea level rise, major changes in coastlines and inundation of low-lying areas, with greatest effects in river deltas and low-lying islands. Particularly vulnerable would be the mega-deltas of Asia, which include cities like Shanghai, Dhaka, and Kolkata, and of course the low-lying island states. It's estimated that 20 to 30% of the species assessed would be at increased risk of extinction if increases in global average temperature exceed 1.5 to 2.5 degrees Celsius. As global average temperature increase exceeds about 3.5 degrees Celsius, model projections suggest significant extinctions, that's 40 to 70% of species assessed around the globe. Some of the impacts of climate change are already translating into monetary flows and expenditure, as brought out by payments made by the insurance industry. Losses to insurers from natural disasters nearly doubled in 2007 to just below 30 billion globally, according to risk records. From 1980 to 2004, the global economic costs of weather-related events totaled $1.4 trillion. These are inflation corrected, of which $340 billion was insured. Far more important than the aggregate impacts of climate change on global economic activity are the consequences for some of the most vulnerable communities across the globe. In Africa, between 75 and 250 million people are projected to be exposed to increased water stress due to climate change by 2020. In the same year, some countries would see yields from rain-fed agriculture reduced by up to 50%. Agricultural production, including access to food, in many African countries would be severely compromised. This would further adversely affect food security and exacerbate malnutrition. Worldwide, the health status of millions of people is projected to be affected through, for example, increases in malnutrition, increased deaths, diseases and injury due to extreme weather events, increased burden of diarrheal disease, increased frequency of cardiorespiratory diseases, and other impacts. Excuse me. The inertia in the climate system is such that even if we were to stabilize the concentration of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere today, climate change would continue for decades. Hence, measures for adapting to the impacts of climate change are urgent and inevitable. However, it is only through appropriate mitigation measures that many impacts can be avoided, reduced, or delayed. The IPCC has found that the costs of even stringent mitigation measures would be modest. For achieving a scenario of stabilized temperature increase of 2 to 2.4 degrees Celsius, the cost to the global economy would be around 0.12% per annum, amounting to a loss of less than 3% of GDP by 2030 and less than 5.5% by 2050. This means that the prosperity that one would reach in 2030 would at best be postponed by a few months or a year at the most. The benefits that go from this go beyond the field of climate change, with substantial benefits in the form of higher levels of energy security, lower pollution at the local level, and attendant health benefits. At the same time, the global community has to provide adequate resources for creating capacity and infrastructure for adapting to the impacts of climate change in some of the poorest and most vulnerable communities. Business and industry will therefore need to work with governments, civil society, and knowledge organizations at an unprecedented level in creating actions and opportunities for themselves and society as a whole. Economic activities will consequently move towards a low-carbon future. And I'd like to conclude by saying that those companies and entities that establish a lead in this endeavor would meet with success in both a business and a societal context. Those that lag behind would suffer the risk of losses in the marketplace and loss of prestige and reputation. The same observation can be applied to nations and governments. There would be a dramatic loss of political power and influence for nations that stand unmoved by the growing global consensus for deep cuts in emissions of greenhouse gases with a sense of urgency. If action to tackle the threat of climate change emerges soon, driven by knowledge of where we are heading, as provided by the findings of the IPCC, there would be reason for optimism that other serious challenges facing the world may also evoke similar responses based on rational assessments of problems and knowledge-driven solutions. In meeting the threat of climate change, we would therefore be creating a precedent that would provide the lead in meeting other global challenges that appear prominently on the horizon today. Thank you very much.
I would like to thank President Karzai and Mr. Pachauri for presenting those two epochal challenges. And some people may have thought, why don't we present at the beginning the financial crisis as a challenge? But we feel when we hear to those two gentlemen, we really know what the essential important matters in the world are. And in this sense, I'm very pleased to ask Madam Secretary Condoleezza Rice to join us. Thank you very much. And all our co-chairs, please, to join us here. Madam Secretary, it is a special pleasure for me to welcome you here because we all remember the discussion which we had, the dialogue 2 years ago through video, and at that time you promised to be with us in person, and you made this promise true. Thank you. Madam Secretary, we welcome you here as a person who has substantially influenced American foreign policy since over 7 years. First, as the National Security Advisor, now as the Secretary of State. Dr. Rice, in some way, you represent what we want to achieve here in Davos. Davos is not only politics. Davos is also thinking, academia, culture. And you, in some way, incorporate all those facets in your own personality. I think you have created high respect for you already in your academic career, and I don't want to go into details. And now, again, you have the world's respect for being a trusted advisor of the President, and at the same time a personality who knows that what she is giving advice about, she has in-depth knowledge about. But also, I should share with you, for those who do not know, you are an accomplished piano player. So, what we would like to hear from you, we don't ask you to play piano, but I would say my preferred piece of music is the 20th piano concert of Mozart. And if you listen to this concert, of course, you have to have, and the key is the piano. That's at the forefront. But you have also the orchestra. And in some way, the US at the moment, if you look at the world, is the piano. And then you have the rest of the world as the orchestra. So what we would like to know is how the piano and the orchestra can play together in harmony to secure peace and prosperity for the world. Welcome, Dr. Reif.